Do medieval love stories feel like they belong only in dusty history books? Think again. What if forbidden passion sparked wars, shattered royal families, and even led to brutal revenge? What if the greatest monarchs of the Middle Ages found themselves caught in scandalous love triangles that ripped apart kingdoms and lives? In the tumultuous medieval era, love, power, and betrayal intertwined in ways that would shock even today's headlines. Number 9. The one where the king defied the Pope for a new love. King Philip II of France was a powerful man known as Philip Augustus, and he aimed to solidify his rule and expand his kingdom. He was married to Ingeborg of Denmark, a princess from a northern land. Their marriage took place in August 1193, a union arranged for political alliance and the promise of a royal heir. On the day of their wedding, the chronicles report that King Philip was strangely distant. On the very next day, a bizarre request emerged from the king. He wanted an annulment. The suddenness of this rejection shocked everyone at court and beyond. Ingeborg was described as a quiet, virtuous woman, and her appearance was considered quite agreeable. Yet Philip insisted. He felt a strong aversion to her, claiming a spiritual kinship that made their marriage invalid. He sent her away first to a monastery in Soissons, then to a more isolated castle near Étampes under strict guard. Ingeborg, however, was no pushover. She had the support of her brother, King Canute VI of Denmark, and more importantly, she appealed directly to the highest spiritual authority, the Pope. She wrote letters detailing her plight, insisting on her rights as the legitimate Queen of France, while Ingeborg was held captive, enduring harsh conditions and the constant pressure to agree to an annulment. King Philip had already turned his attention elsewhere. He had become deeply smitten with Agnes of Merania. Agnes was the daughter of Berthold, Duke of Merania, a powerful German nobleman. She was beautiful, vibrant, and according to historical accounts, quickly captured Philip's heart. Their romance blossomed with scandalous speed. By June 1196, less than 3 years after his rejected marriage to Ingeborg, Philip married Agnes. This second marriage was a direct defiance of the Church. Pope Celestine III had not granted an annulment for Ingeborg's marriage. When news reached Rome that Philip had taken a new wife while his first was still alive and protesting, the papal court was furious. Pope Celestine III issued a stern warning to Philip, urging him to return to Ingeborg. Philip ignored these warnings. He continued to live openly with Agnes, treating her as his queen, and their union as legitimate. The situation escalated dramatically under the next pope, Innocent III, one of the most assertive pontiffs in medieval history. Innocent III was determined to uphold the sanctity of marriage and papal authority. He sent legates to France demanding that Philip take back Ingeborg. When Philip refused, the Pope did something drastic. In December 1199, he placed France under an interdict. An interdict was a powerful spiritual weapon. It meant that most religious services were suspended throughout the entire kingdom. Churches were closed. Bells fell silent. Baptisms were forbidden. And the dead could not receive Christian burial. It was a spiritual siege that caused immense distress among the common people who believed their souls were in peril. Chroniclers describe the profound gloom that settled over France as communities felt cut off from God's grace. Philip tried to resist. He tried to force bishops and abbots to ignore the interdict, but many bravely refused, facing his wrath. Pressure from his own nobles and the suffering of his people became unbearable. Many of his vassals threatened to abandon him, fearing the eternal damnation promised by the Pope. Even his own family members, including his mother, urged him to submit. Agnes of Merania, the woman at the center of this storm, found herself in an increasingly precarious position. She had given birth to 2 children with Philip, a daughter named Marie and a son named Philip Hirapel. But the Church declared these children illegitimate. In July 1200, under overwhelming pressure, King Philip agreed to separate from Agnes and take back Ingeborg. She was sent away to Poissy, and her health rapidly declined. She died in July 1201, a year after her separation from Philip, having given birth to a third child, a son named John, who did not survive. Her death, according to some contemporary accounts, was hastened by sorrow and despair. Philip, though he had formally reconciled with Ingeborg and brought her back to court, never truly accepted her as his wife. Continued to pursue annulment, sending letters and representatives to Rome for years, arguing for the invalidity of their initial marriage. Ingeborg endured this emotional and social rejection with quiet dignity. She remained a queen in name, but often lived in isolation, her husband's animosity a constant shadow over her life. The political fallout from this royal love triangle was immense. The interdict had weakened Philip's authority and forced him to confront the limits of his power against the Church. It highlighted the immense influence the papacy held over European monarchs. Philip's personal desire had plunged his entire kingdom into spiritual crisis, demonstrating how deeply intertwined personal desires and public policy could become in the medieval world. The saga lasted for nearly 2 decades, with Ingeborg constantly battling for her rights, never truly regaining her husband's affection, but steadfastly refusing to relinquish her title as Queen of France. Number 8. The one where the Queen's scandal led to her execution. Catherine Howard was young, vivacious, and captured the attention of King Henry VIII. She was a cousin to his second queen, Anne Boleyn, and entered the royal court as a lady-in-waiting to Henry's fourth wife, Anne of Cleves. Henry, by this point, was a large, aging monarch, often ill, and much changed from the athletic young king he once was. Yet he was still the absolute ruler of England, and his word was law. He grew increasingly infatuated with Catherine's youthful charm and cheerful disposition, seeing in her a stark contrast to the placid Anne of Cleves. Their relationship developed swiftly, and Henry decided to divorce Anne of Cleves, finding her personally unappealing. In July 1540, Henry married Catherine Howard, making her his 5th queen. She was believed to be around 19 years old, while Henry was nearing 50. Initially, Catherine brought much joy to the king. He lavished her with jewels and gifts and expressed how happy she made him, even declaring her his rose without a thorn. However, Catherine's past held secrets. Before her marriage to the king, she had grown up in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. During this time, she had engaged in relationships that were considered highly inappropriate by the strict moral standards of the court, especially for a woman destined for royalty. One of these relationships was with a young man named Francis Dereham. Records indicate they had a physical relationship and even considered themselves betrothed, exchanging vows. Dereham later claimed they were truly married in the eyes of God, though no formal ceremony took place. After her marriage to the king, Catherine, perhaps out of youthful indiscretion or a desperate need for companionship in the stifling royal court, became entangled with another man, Thomas Culpeper. Culpeper was a gentleman of the Privy Chamber, a trusted aide to the king, and described as handsome and charming. The affair began subtly with secret meetings arranged by a lady-in-waiting, Lady Rochford, who had also been involved in the downfall of Anne Boleyn. These clandestine meetings took place in the Queen's private chambers, often late at night. Letters were exchanged between Catherine and Culpeper, filled with affectionate language and expressions of longing. One surviving letter from Catherine to Culpeper refers to him as "my own sweetheart" and expresses a desire to speak with him, lamenting their inability to meet openly. These letters, discovered later, provided damning evidence of their illicit relationship. The existence of these secret relationships began to unravel in late 1541. While the king was on a progress visiting various parts of his kingdom, rumors reached the ears of Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. Cranmer, a shrewd and cautious man, gathered evidence meticulously. He was handed a letter from a former servant who detailed Catherine's earlier indiscretions with Francis Dereham and others before her marriage to the king. This was a grave accusation. If Catherine had been unchaste before her marriage, especially if she had been pre-contracted to Dyrham, her marriage to Henry would be invalid. More damningly, if she had continued an affair after becoming queen, it would be considered treason, an act punishable by death. Cranmer, with the help of other Privy Council members, presented the evidence to the king on All Saints' Day, November 1st, 1541. Henry was initially distraught, refusing to believe the accusations against his young queen. He ordered a thorough investigation. As the investigation deepened, Francis Dyrham was interrogated. Under pressure, he confessed to his relationship with Catherine before her marriage. More importantly, he also implicated Thomas Culpeper in an ongoing affair with the queen after her marriage to the king. Both Dyrham and Culpeper were arrested and subjected to intense questioning. Under duress, they admitted their relationships with the queen. Lady Rochford, the go-between, also confessed to her role in arranging the secret meetings. The revelations were devastating. His Rose without a thorn was now seen as a woman who had deceived him and dishonored his crown. Catherine was confined to her chambers while the investigations continued. Her ladies in waiting were dismissed. She was stripped of her jewels and royal privileges. Parliament was quickly assembled to deal with the unprecedented crisis. A bill of attainder was passed against her, allowing for her condemnation without a formal trial based solely on the evidence presented to Parliament. On February 13th, 1542, at the Tower of London, Queen Catherine Howard was executed. She walked to the scaffold with composure, asking for mercy and acknowledging her fault. She was beheaded alongside Lady Rochford, who had facilitated her affair with Culpeper. Francis Dyrham and Thomas Culpeper had been executed earlier in December 1541, their bodies displayed as a warning. Culpeper was beheaded while Dyrham was hanged, drawn, and quartered, a more brutal punishment for treason. The scandal surrounding Catherine Howard was a profound personal blow to King Henry VIII. It showed his vulnerability, his desire for love, and his ultimate willingness to enforce extreme penalties to maintain his image and the sanctity of the royal lineage. Turmoil this love triangle unleashed was personal devastation for Catherine and her lovers, and a powerful reminder of the unforgiving nature of Tudor power and the consequences of royal indiscretion. Number 7. The one where the king broke with the church for a new queen. King Henry VIII of England had been married to Catherine of Aragon for over 20 years. Their union had been secured through political alliance, and Catherine had given birth to a daughter Mary. However, Henry desperately wanted a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty. As Catherine grew older and after several miscarriages and stillbirths, it became clear she was unlikely to bear him a son. Henry began to question the legitimacy of their marriage, citing a passage in the Old Testament that forbade marrying a brother's wife. Catherine had been previously married to Henry's elder brother Arthur, who died young. It was against this backdrop of dynastic anxiety that Anne Boleyn arrived at court. Anne was a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine, a young woman of sharp wit, sophisticated charm, and a captivating personality. She had spent time in the French court, which had given her a certain elegance and worldliness. Henry, initially captivated by Anne's sister Mary, soon turned his affections towards Anne. Anne Boleyn, however, was no ordinary mistress. She refused to become his lover without the promise of marriage, a radical stance that only deepened Henry's desire for her. She saw an opportunity to become queen, and Henry, consumed by his infatuation and his need for a son, saw Anne as the answer to both his personal and dynastic problems. Quest for an annulment from Catherine of Aragon became known as the King's Great Matter. Henry appealed to Pope Clement VII, arguing that his marriage to Catherine was unlawful and cursed by God. Catherine, however, steadfastly refused to accept an annulment. She asserted the validity of her marriage, arguing that her union with Arthur had never been consummated, thus making her subsequent marriage to Henry legitimate in the eyes of the Church. She also had powerful allies, including her nephew, Emperor Charles V, who held the Pope captive at one point. The Pope, caught between a powerful monarch and an even more powerful emperor, stalled for years. This frustrated Henry immensely. His desire for Anne and his need for a male heir became an obsession, driving him to take increasingly drastic measures. Anne Boleyn was a constant presence at court during this period, living openly with Henry, though not yet married to him. Her influence grew, and she became a key figure in the faction pushing for the annulment and a break with Rome. By 1532, Anne was pregnant. Henry knew he had to act decisively to legitimize their child. He secretly married Anne Boleyn in January 1533, before his annulment from Catherine was officially recognized. Thomas Cranmer, the new Archbishop of Canterbury, who was sympathetic to Henry's cause, declared Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void in May 1533. A few days later, he declared Henry's marriage to Anne valid. Catherine of Aragon was stripped of her title as queen and sent away from court, confined to various isolated estates. She never saw Henry again and remained defiant until her death in 1536, always considering herself the true Queen of England. Anne Boleyn was crowned queen in June 1533, a spectacular coronation designed to assert her legitimacy. In September 1533, she gave birth to a daughter, Princess Elizabeth, who would one day become one of England's greatest monarchs. However, the birth of a daughter, not a son, was a disappointment to Henry. As time went on, Henry's initial passion for Anne began to wane. Anne, under immense pressure to produce a male heir, suffered several miscarriages. Her personality, once charming, became more assertive, and to Henry increasingly irritating. Meanwhile, a new woman had caught the king's eye, Jane Seymour. A quiet, gentle lady in waiting to Queen Anne herself, Jane Seymour presented a stark contrast to Anne. She was demure, obedient, and seemed to embody the traditional virtues Henry sought in a wife. Henry began to court Jane discreetly, and Anne became increasingly aware of his growing interest in another. The queen who had replaced Catherine was now facing a similar threat. The speed of Anne's downfall was astonishing. In May 1536, after just over 3 years as queen, Anne Boleyn was arrested on charges of treason, including adultery, incest with her brother George Boleyn, and conspiring to murder the king. The charges were largely fabricated, designed to get rid of Anne and pave the way for Henry to marry Jane Seymour. Anne's brother George Boleyn and 4 other men accused of being her lovers were also arrested. All were found guilty in swift, unfair trials based on flimsy evidence and coerced confessions. On May 17, 1536, George Boleyn and the other 4 men were executed. 2 days later, on May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed by beheading at the Tower of London, making her the first English queen to be publicly executed. The day after Anne's execution, Henry VIII was formally betrothed to Jane Seymour. 10 days later, they were married. Jane Seymour quickly became pregnant, and in October 1537 gave birth to a son, Prince Edward, fulfilling Henry's greatest wish. However, Jane died soon after childbirth from complications, leaving Henry genuinely heartbroken. The turmoil caused by this triangle of Henry, Catherine, and Anne, and then Henry, Anne, and Jane was immense. It led to the English Reformation, severing England's ties with the Roman Catholic Church and establishing the Church of England with the monarch as its head. It resulted in the deaths of a queen and many courtiers. It reshaped the political and religious landscape of England for centuries, all driven by a king's desire for a son and his fickle affections. Number 6. The one where a queen's lovers led to her downfall. Mary, Queen of Scots, was a figure of immense charisma and tragedy. She had been Queen of France for a brief period before returning to Scotland in 1561, a young widow entering a country fractured by religious and political rivalries. As the only legitimate child of James V of Scotland and a great-granddaughter of Henry VII of England, she was a claimant to the English throne, a fact that made her a constant threat to Queen Elizabeth I. Mary's first marriage to King Francis II of France had been a loving union, but short-lived. Back in Scotland, she needed to secure her position and produce an heir. She sought a husband who would strengthen her claim to the English throne and unite her fractious Scottish nobility. In 1565, she chose her first cousin, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. Darnley was a tall, handsome young man, and, importantly, also had a claim to the English throne, though through a different lineage than Mary's. Their marriage united two powerful claims, making their potential heir an even stronger candidate for both Scottish and English crowns. Mary was deeply infatuated with Darnley at first, and their wedding was celebrated with much pomp. However, Darnley soon proved to be a vain, arrogant, and ambitious man. He demanded more power, specifically the crown matrimonial, which would have made him co-sovereign with Mary and granted him the throne. If she died without an heir, Mary refused, fearing he would usurp her authority. Their relationship quickly deteriorated, marked by bitter quarrels and Darnley's increasing resentment and drunkenness. Mary, feeling isolated and betrayed by her husband, sought companionship and advice from her trusted foreign secretary, David Rizzio. Rizzio was an Italian musician and diplomat who had risen quickly in Mary's favor. He was intelligent, loyal, and provided Mary with comfort and political counsel. However, his close relationship with the Queen and his foreign origins bred intense jealousy among the Scottish nobles, including Darnley. They resented his influence and whispered rumors of an illicit affair, though no definitive evidence supported this. Darnley, fueled by paranoia and a council of conspiring nobles, orchestrated a horrific plot. On March 9, 1566, while Mary, heavily pregnant, was having supper with Rizzio and other attendants in her private chambers at Holyrood Palace, Darnley and a group of armed Protestant lords burst in. Rizzio clung to Mary's skirts for protection, but he was dragged away, stabbed multiple times, and left dead in the adjacent room. The attack was brutal and intended to intimidate Mary and assert Darnley's dominance. The murder of Rizzio deeply traumatized Mary and irrevocably shattered any remaining affection for Darnley. She gave birth to her son James in June 1566, but her marriage to Darnley was beyond repair. She publicly expressed her contempt for him. It was during this period that James Hepburn, the fourth Earl of Bothwell, entered the scene more prominently. Bothwell was a powerful and ambitious Scottish nobleman, known for his bravery and loyalty to Mary. He had been a consistent supporter of the Queen against her rebellious lords. As Mary's marriage to Darnley became a farce, she increasingly relied on Bothwell for protection and political advice. A romantic relationship between them developed, although the exact timing and nature of its beginning remain debated by historians. Mary's desire to rid herself of Darnley grew, though her direct involvement in what followed is fiercely contested. On the night of February 10, 1567, a massive explosion ripped through Kirkhope Field, a house on the outskirts of Edinburgh where Darnley was recovering from an illness. Darnley's body, along with that of his servant, was found outside the house, apparently having been suffocated or strangled after escaping the blast, not killed by the explosion itself. The murder of Darnley sent shockwaves across Scotland and Europe. Public suspicion immediately fell on Bothwell, and many also implicated Mary. Anonymous placards appeared in Edinburgh, accusing Bothwell of the murder. Bothwell was put on a sham trial, but he was acquitted due to a lack of genuine prosecution and his own powerful display of force. Within 3 months of Darnley's murder, Mary created further scandal. On April 24, 1567, she was abducted by Bothwell while traveling from Stirling to Edinburgh. Many historians believe this was a staged abduction. As Mary seemed a willing participant, Bothwell then divorced his own wife, Jane Gordon. On May 15, 1567, Mary, Queen of Scots, married James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, in a Protestant ceremony, despite her own Catholic faith. This marriage was a catastrophic political error. It confirmed in the minds of many Scottish nobles and the wider European public that Mary was complicit in Darnley's murder. The marriage to a man so widely suspected of regicide horrified Catholic and Protestant nobles alike, a confederacy of lords rose up against Mary and Bothwell. Queen's forces met the Confederate lords at Carberry Hill in June 1567. Bothwell, realizing the situation was hopeless, fled, never to see Mary again. He eventually ended up imprisoned in Denmark, where he died years later in squalid conditions. Mary was captured by the lords and taken to Lochulven Castle, where she was imprisoned. On July 24, 1567, under extreme duress, Mary, Queen of Scots, was forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI. Mary eventually escaped Lochleven and tried to raise an army, but she was defeated. She fled to England, seeking refuge with her cousin Queen Elizabeth I. Instead, Elizabeth held her captive for 18 years, viewing her as a constant threat to her own throne. In 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was found guilty of plotting against Elizabeth and was executed by beheading, bringing her tragic story to an end. The triangle involving Mary, Darnley, and Bothwell, exacerbated by the shadowy figure of Rizzio, led to an unprecedented level of turmoil. A king's murder, a queen's forced abdication, her flight, and ultimately her execution. It plunged Scotland into civil war and irrevocably altered the course of British history. Number 5. The one where a royal mistress wielded immense power. Agnes Sorel was a beautiful and intelligent woman who entered the service of Marie of Anjou, Queen of France. Around the year 1444, Marie was the long-suffering wife of King Charles VII. Charles was a complicated figure who had finally been crowned king with the help of Joan of Arc, but he was often melancholy, indecisive, and not particularly attractive. His marriage to Marie of Anjou was politically advantageous but lacked warmth or passion. Agnes Sorel, however, was vibrant, witty, and possessed a captivating charm that immediately caught the attention of the king. She was known for her striking beauty, described by chroniclers as having a lovely face, graceful figure, and flowing blonde hair. She became King Charles VII's chief mistress, or maîtresse en titre, a role that, while scandalous, was often openly acknowledged and even given a degree of status. She was granted the title of Dame de Beauté, a significant personal and symbolic recognition. She was given lavish estates, jewels, and rich garments. She was also given immense influence over the king, a fact that caused considerable tension at court. Queen Marie of Anjou, despite being the legitimate queen and mother of the king's many children, found herself increasingly marginalized. She was a pious, dutiful, and dignified woman, but she lacked the captivating allure that Agnes held for Charles. Marie had given birth to a large family of 12 children, including the future King Louis XI, ensuring the succession, yet she was forced to endure the open display of her husband's affections for another woman. While Marie maintained her dignity and rarely complained openly, the situation was undoubtedly humiliating for her and her family. Agnes Sorel was not just a beautiful face, she was also intelligent and ambitious. She used her influence over the king not only for personal gain, but also, surprisingly, for political purposes. Historical accounts suggest that Agnes encouraged Charles VII to take a more active role in governance and to push back against the English during the 100 Years' War. She is credited by some with helping to rekindle the king's ambition and resolve. She reportedly dressed in daring fashions, setting trends that scandalized and fascinated the court. Her prominent position and influence, however, created much resentment. The French court was rife with factions, and Agnes became a target for those who disliked the king's favoritism, her perceived extravagance, or her open disregard for traditional courtly modesty. She was especially disliked by the Dauphin Louis, the future Louis XI, who despised her influence over his father and viewed her as a disruptive force. The jealousy and animosity directed at Agnes were palpable. Despite the open nature of her position, The king's devotion to her seemed almost obsessive. She often appeared in public alongside the king, sometimes even taking precedence over noblewomen, a blatant breach of etiquette that further infuriated many. She bore Charles 4 daughters, further cementing her position and showing the extent of their physical relationship. In February 1450, at the age of 28, Agnes Sorel suddenly fell ill while accompanying the king. On a campaign against the English, she died shortly after giving birth to her 4th child. Her sudden death immediately sparked rumors of poischild. While no definitive proof emerged and modern historians often attribute her death to mercury poisoning from treatments for intestinal pain lingered for centuries, a testament to the intense feelings she evoked. The turmoil this triangle created was primarily at court rather than on the battlefield. It was a turmoil of jealousy, resentment, and a shift in the traditional power dynamics of the queen's role. Agnes Sorel, by her sheer force of personality and the king's overwhelming devotion, managed to carve out a unique position, challenging the very idea of royal legitimacy and influence. Her presence cast a lone shadow over Queen Marie's life, highlighting the vulnerabilities of even a queen when faced with a king's deeply held passions. Her death, shrouded in mystery, only added to the dramatic narrative of her extraordinary life and influence. Number 4. The One, where the queen took revenge on her king's favorite. Edward II became King of England in 1307, succeeding his strong and formidable father, Edward I. From the very beginning of his reign, Edward II's Persian and political instamming. His deepest affection and trust were placed not in his wife but in Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight who had been his companion since childhood. Gaveston was described as handsome, witty, and charming, but also arrogant and insolent. Edward II elevated Gaveston to an unprecedented position of power and wealth, granting him titles like Earl of Cornwall and showering him with riches and royal favors. King's devotion to Gaveston was absolute and openly displayed, much to the anger and disgust of the English nobility. The barons, a powerful and fiercely independent group, resented Gaveston's influence, his foreign origins, and his habit of giving mocking nicknames to the most powerful magnates. Edward II had been married in 1308 to Isabella of France, the daughter of the powerful King Philip IV of France. Isabella was a young, intelligent, and spirited woman, and her marriage was meant to solidify peace between England and France. However, from the very start, her marriage was overshadowed by Gaveston. At their wedding, Edward reportedly paid more attention to Gaveston than to his new bride. Chroniclers noted Isabella's humiliation and growing resentment. As the years passed, Isabella, despite giving birth to 4 children including the future Edward III, found herself increasingly mortalized and neglected by her husband. Her allowance was meager, and her requests for influence or attention were often ignored in favor of Gaveston. Isabella was a proud princess of France, and this treatment was a profound insult to her and her powerful family. The resentment of the English barons reached a boiling point. They viewed Gaveston as a corrupting influence on the king and a threat to the stability of the kingdom. They formed a powerful opposition demanding Gaveston's exile. Edward II, though heartbroken, was forced to banish his favorite multiple times under threat of civil war. But each time Gaveston found a way to return to England, either through the king's manipulation or simply Edward's inability to live without him. In 1312, after Gaveston's latest return, the barons, led by Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, captured him. Despite promises of a formal trial, Gaveston was summarily executed without the king's knowledge or consent. He was stabbed and beheaded. His death sparked deep grief in Edward II and intensified the animosity between the king and his barons. For years after Gaveston's death, Edward II relied on other favorites, most notably the father and son, Hugh Despenser the Elder. The Despensers, like Gaveston, gained immense wealth and power through the king's favor, and like Gaveston, they alienated the nobility and, crucially, Queen Isabella. The Despensers became increasingly arrogant and greedy, dispossessing nobles of their lands and creating new enemies, including Isabella's French family. Isabella, increasingly desperate and humiliated, decided to take matters into her own hands. In 1325, she traveled to France, ostensibly to negotiate a peace treaty between England and France. While there, she refused to return to England unless the Despensers were removed from court. More significantly, she formed an alliance with Roger Mortimer, a powerful English baron who had been exiled by Edward II and the Despensers. Mortimer became her lover and her co-conspirator. With the support of her brother, the King of France, and other exiled English nobles, Isabella and Mortimer raised an army. In September 1326, Isabella Mortimer and their forces invaded England. The invasion was a stunning success. Edward II found little support among his own people, who were tired of his misrule and the greed of the Despensers. Hugh Despenser the Younger was subjected to a brutal and public execution, hanged, drawn, and quartered. A fate often reserved for traitors, his father suffered a similar though less brutal death. Edward II attempted to flee but was captured. In January 1327, Parliament deposed him, forcing him to abdicate in favor of his son Edward III. Isabella and Mortimer became the de facto rulers of England, governing as regents for the young king. Edward II was imprisoned in various castles. His ultimate fate was grim. In September 1327, he died at Berkeley Castle. While the official cause was illness, it was widely believed, and historical accounts suggest that he was brutally murdered on Mortimer's orders, likely with Isabella's implicit consent. The method of his death was said to be a red-hot poker, inserted anally, a particularly gruesome way to punish a king perceived as having unnatural affections and neglecting his queen. The love triangle, or more accurately the power struggle fueled by Edward II's devotion to his favorites over his queen, led to unprecedented turmoil. It resulted in civil war, the deposition of a king, the brutal execution of his favorites, and ultimately the violent murder of the king himself. Isabella, once the neglected queen, had become a powerful avenger, reshaping the English monarchy through her ambition and ruthlessness, forever marking the end of a tumultuous reign. Number 3. The one where a king took a betrothed queen, leading to war. Isabella of Angoulême was a young woman of extraordinary beauty and considerable inheritance, a fact that made her a highly desirable bride in late 12th century France. She was the daughter of Aymer, Count of Angoulême. Her hand in marriage was already promised to Hugh X of Lusignan, a powerful and influential nobleman in the region of Poitou, a territory that bordered the English territories in France. The Lusignan family was known for their ambition and their extensive network of alliances. This betrothal was a significant political arrangement designed to secure the stability of the region and build alliances. Hugh X of Lusignan was deeply invested in this union, as it would expand his family's influence and consolidate their power base. The wedding preparations were well underway, and the betrothal was widely known and accepted. However, King John of England, a monarch known for his capricious and often ruthless behavior, had other plans. John was the younger brother of the legendary Richard the Lionheart, and he had recently inherited the English throne and its vast territories in France. He was struggling to maintain control over these continental possessions, which were constantly threatened by the French king, Philip II. John was also recently divorced from his first wife, Isabella of Gloucester, a politically weak union that had produced no heirs. In August 1200, King John was traveling through his French territories. He encountered Isabella of Angoulême. Accounts suggest that John, captivated by her beauty, became instantly infatuated. He decided then and there that he wanted her for himself, regardless of her existing betrothal to Hugh X of Lusignan. John, using his royal authority, simply took Isabella. He married her in Angoulême on August 24, 1200, without seeking a papal dispensation for the broken betrothal or even bothering to inform Hugh X of Lusignan in advance. This was an astonishing act, a blatant disregard for feudal custom and a profound insult to the powerful Lusignan family. Hugh X of Lusignan, already the future husband of Isabella, was understandably furious and deeply humiliated. Not only had King John stolen his promised bride, but he had also undermined the Lusignan family's honor and standing. Hugh and his family immediately appealed to their overlord, King Philip II of France, for justice. Philip II, a cunning and ambitious monarch, saw this as a golden opportunity to weaken King John and expand his own territories. Philip II summoned King John to appear before his court in Paris to answer for his actions. John, believing himself to be an independent sovereign and refusing to submit to Philip's feudal authority, refused to appear. This act of defiance was a direct challenge to the French crown. Philip II, using John's breach of feudal law and his refusal to appear in court as justification, declared all of John's continental possessions forfeit. This effectively meant that Philip declared John's French territories, including vast regions like Normandy, Anjou, Maine, and Poitou, to be rightfully returned to the French crown. This declaration ignited a major war between England and France, known as the Anglo-French War of 1202 to 1204. Hugh X of Lusignan and his family actively supported King Philip II, providing troops and resources to fight against John. The war was disastrous for King John. He proved to be an ineffective military leader, often vacillating and failing to inspire loyalty. His nickname, Lackland, was earned in part due to his failures in this conflict. Over the next 2 years, Philip II systematically conquered most of John's French territories. Normandy, the ancestral homeland of the English kings, since William the Conqueror fell in 1204. Anjou, Maine, and Touraine soon followed. By the end of the war, King John had lost virtually all of his vast French possessions, retaining only the Duchy of Aquitaine, Gascony. This monumental loss profoundly weakened the English monarchy and shifted the balance of power in Western Europe decisively in favor of France. Isabella of Angoulême, the woman at the center of this storm, went on to have several children with King John, including the future King Henry III of England. She was queen for 16 years. But her marriage was not always happy. After John's death in 1216, Isabella returned to France. Remarkably, in 1220, she married her former betrothed, Hugh X of Lusignan, the very man John had scorned. Together they had several children, and Isabella lived a long life, often involved in political intrigue against her son, the King of England, and her former husband's kingdom. The love triangle between Isabella of Angoulême, Hugh X of Lusignan, and King John led to immense turmoil. It directly triggered a major war that resulted in the near-total loss of the English king's ancestral lands in France. It reshaped the geography of European power, confined the English monarchy largely to its island, and had profound consequences for the identity and destiny of both England and France for centuries to come. Personal slight of a stolen bride escalated into a conflict that fundamentally altered the course of medieval history. Number 2, the one where the Queen changed kings and started a rebellion. Eleanor of Aquitaine was arguably one of the most powerful and fascinating women of the Middle Ages. She inherited the vast Duchy of Aquitaine and Gascony at the age of 15, making her the wealthiest and most desirable bride in Europe. In 1137, she married Louis VII, who soon after became King of France. Their union brought her immense territories under the French crown. Louis VII was a pious and rather ascetic king, more interested in monastic life and religious devotion than the worldly affairs and grand courtly rituals that Eleanor cherished. Eleanor, known for her vibrant personality, love of poetry, music, and the arts, found the French court dull and stifling. She was also disappointed by Louis's lack of a male heir. Having given birth to 2 daughters, their relationship was strained. They went on the Second Crusade together, an arduous journey that further exposed their differences. Eleanor, alongside her ladies, adopted crusader attire, and some chroniclers hint at scandalous behavior during the campaign, though concrete evidence is sparse. The lack of an heir and their fundamental incompatibility led Louis to seek an annulment in March 1152. After 15 years of marriage, the marriage of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Louis VII of France was annulled on grounds of consanguinity, meaning they were deemed too closely related to be legally married by church law. The annulment, while technically legal, was widely seen as a political maneuver reflecting their personal and political estrangement. Eleanor, now free and still, the independent Duchess of Aquitaine, was a prize for any ambitious nobleman. She needed to act quickly to secure her future and protect her lands from being absorbed by the French crown. She embarked on a journey back to her homeland, narrowly escaping 2 attempts by powerful lords to abduct her and force her into marriage. Just 2 months after her annulment from Louis VII, in May 1152, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. Henry was an ambitious and dynamic young man, nearly a decade younger than Eleanor. He was the son of Empress Matilda and the grandson of King Henry I of England, making him a strong contender for the English throne. This marriage was a bombshell. It brought together Eleanor's vast Aquitaine with Henry's inherited Normandy and Anjou, creating an immense, powerful empire that stretched from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees. This Angevin empire dwarfed the direct territories of the King of France. Louis VII, who had just released Eleanor and her lands, was now surrounded by the territories of his most formidable rival, Henry. He had effectively handed his enemy the keys to a vast new domain. 2 years later, in 1154, Henry ascended to the English throne as King Henry II, establishing the Plantagenet dynasty. Eleanor became Queen of England, a formidable and influential consort. Together, they had 8 children, 5 of whom were sons, including the future Richard the Lionheart and John. Their early marriage was a tempestuous but powerful partnership, consolidating their vast empire. However, the powerful personalities of Eleanor and Henry eventually clashed. Henry II was a strong, controlling ruler, and Eleanor, accustomed to ruling her own duchy and exerting influence, found herself increasingly constrained by his authority. Henry also had numerous mistresses, and his affections for his most prominent one, Rosamund Clifford, became an open secret and a profound insult to. The final straw came when Eleanor, supported by her sons, orchestrated a major rebellion against Henry II. In 1173 to 1174, she encouraged her sons, including Richard, Geoffrey, and the young Henry the Younger, to rise up against their father, who they felt was denying them their rightful inheritances and power. She even dressed her younger sons as knights and sent them to seek support from Louis VII, her former husband, who gleefully aided the rebellion against his rival. The rebellion plunged the Angevin Empire into civil war. Henry II, a brilliant military strategist, eventually crushed the revolt. He captured Eleanor while she was attempting to flee. As punishment for her betrayal and her role in instigating her son's rebellion, Henry imprisoned Eleanor. She spent the next 16 years, from 1174 to 1189, largely confined, primarily at Winchester Castle and Salisbury Castle, under strict guard. During Eleanor's imprisonment, Henry II ruled his vast domains, but the family strife continued, fueled by his son's ambitions and his own autocratic rule. When Henry II died in 1189, Eleanor was immediately released from confinement by her favorite son, Richard the Lionheart, who became king. She then played a crucial role as regent during Richard's absence on the Third Crusade and his subsequent captivity. The love triangle, or rather, the succession of marriages, and the complex relationship between Eleanor Louis VII and Henry II led to immense turmoil. It fundamentally reshaped the political map of Western Europe, giving rise to the vast Angevin Empire. It sparked a major family rebellion that resulted in the Queen's long imprisonment. Eleanor's choices and actions, fueled by ambition, personality, and the desire for power, left an indelible mark on the course of English and French history. proving that even a powerful annulment could set the stage for decades of conflict and drama. Number 1. The one where forbidden love led to brutal revenge and the tragic end. Peter Abelard was one of the most brilliant and controversial scholars of the 12th century. He was a master logician, philosopher, and theologian, renowned for his sharp intellect and captivating lectures. Students flocked from all over Europe to hear him teach in Paris, drawn by his revolutionary thinking and his Medoc presence. He was at the height of his fame and intellectual power, living a life of academic renown. Heloise was a young woman of extraordinary intellect and beauty, living in the care of her uncle, Canon Fulbert, a respected church official in Paris. Heloise was also a remarkably gifted scholar, fluent in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and possessing a deep understanding of philosophy and theology. Her intelligence was widely recognized, and she was considered one of the most learned women of her time. Abelard, captivated by Heloise's brilliance and beauty, sought to become her tutor. He convinced Fulbert to allow him to live in his house, citing the need for constant proximity to effectively teach his niece. What began as a teacher-student relationship soon blossomed into a passionate and forbidden love affair. Their relationship was kept secret, a dangerous undertaking given Abelard's clerical status and Heloise's position as a canon's niece. However, their intense connection and clandestine meetings eventually led to Heloise becoming pregnant. This was a catastrophic development for Abelard, whose career and reputation as a scholar and cleric depended on his celibacy and adherence to church law. Heloise was sent away to Abelard's sister in Brittany, where she gave birth to a son whom they named Osterla. To protect Abelard's reputation and perhaps to legitimize their child in some way, Abelard proposed a secret marriage to Heloise. He made it clear to her that such a marriage would ruin his career, as marriage was forbidden for clergy. Heloise, understanding the devastating consequences for him, initially resisted, arguing that his genius and scholarly pursuits were far more important than a marriage to her. However, Abelard persisted, and they were secretly married. Accounts differ on the exact circumstances, but it was a private ceremony, likely in the presence of Fulbert. Their intention was to keep the marriage secret, but word eventually reached Fulbert. Canon Fulbert, Heloise's uncle, was consumed by rage and humiliation. He felt that Abelard had not only seduced his niece, but had also profoundly dishonored his family. He believed Abelard had tricked them and that the secret marriage was merely a ploy to avoid public scandal while still keeping his illicit relationship with Heloise. He wanted revenge, and he wanted it to be brutal and absolute. One night, while Abelard was asleep in his lodgings, Fulbert's servants broke in. They physically assaulted Abelard and, in a horrifying act of revenge, castrated him. This brutal act irrevocably mutilated him, ensuring he could never pursue his scholarly career as a cleric again, as celibacy was a requirement, but castration effectively removed him. For castration effectuary, it was a shocking act of violence that exposed the deeply intertwined personal lives and ecclesiastical careers of the time. Abelard, utterly humiliated and physically broken, retreated from public life. He sought refuge in the Abbey of Saint-Denis, taking monastic vows. Heloise, in an act of deep love and devotion, and perhaps feeling responsible for Abelard's fate, also took monastic vows, entering the Conde of Argentou, leaving behind their son, Astrolabe, who was raised by others. Their forced separation, fueled by family honor and brutal revenge, marked the end of their direct physical relationship. However, their story did not end there. Years later, they began to correspond, exchanging a series of remarkable and deeply personal letters. These letters, which have survived, are considered some of the most profound and moving expressions of love, sorrow, and intellectual debate from the medieval period. Heloise's letters reveal her continued passionate love for Abelard, her struggles with her forced monastic life, and her intellectual prowess. Abelard's letters in turn show his remorse, his theological reflections, and his continued intellectual engagement with her. Their story, a love triangle complicated by family honor and the brutal consequences of forbidden desire, created immense turmoil. It led to a horrifying act of mutilation, the forced separation of two brilliant minds, and their confinement to monastic life. The personal tragedy of Heloise and Abelard became a legendary tale of passion, betrayal, and the unforgiving nature of medieval society, resonating through centuries as a testament to love's enduring power. Even in the face of unspeakable suffering,